one by one. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
We'll go ahead and open today's formal informal session of the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners for June 24th, 2021. And Commissioner Kula, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And do we have anything, commissioners, to add to our joint calendar schedule? I believe Carrie has a few additions that she's noted. Commissioners, anything else? Okay, if there's nothing else, we have public comments, and I want to thank Carolina for getting those to us as late as this morning, and thank everybody who wrote to us and appreciate the time they took to send us an email. And I think we should do announcements at the top because Commissioner Kula has a rather important announcement to share with us. So why wait till the end? So Commissioner Kula.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Chair. Last week I announced that I was running for governor as a Democrat. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide that news to you as well.
Absolutely. And I hate to think that we were just a stepping stone to grander political aspirations, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you for that respectful comment.
Yes,
and make me laugh.
Yes. Commissioner Burschauer.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that we have been receiving numerous emails on the House District 23 nomination process. You're not going to see all those in the public comment because I haven't been forwarding them personally because it's not on the agenda, but I just wanted to let the public know that we are reading them and we're seeing them and they're numerous, but you just might not see them in posted online.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, I just sorry.
No, go ahead.
I did have one actual announcement, which I was making notes of here, which is that with the heat wave that's coming, our emergency manager has been working with lots and lots of agencies and churches and community members. And so together with Howie Harkema and Director Manfred and a couple other people, they're putting together a resource flyer to let people know where in their community they can find a cool space and where they can find water. And I think at this point there are safe, cool spaces throughout the county. So that flyer will be available in English and Spanish by the end of the day. And I'll make sure that both of you get copies, and I'll send one to Ken as well.
Right. I know Brian Young has been working on that as well as Director Manfred, so appreciate that. And also in terms of announcements, we did find out this week that Providence and YCAP's joint grant for the motel sheltering project, which will basically be a continuation of the one that YCAP's been doing. They say they have somewhere between a 75 and 78% success rate in terms of moving people who were chronically homeless or medically fragile from the motels into more permanent stability, and that is a good thing. So this will basically ensure the two motels would be able to be part of that. So we did find out, and I think Providence being a great partner, and YCAP's doing the real heavy lifting there. So that was good news. All righty, so let's go ahead, and if there's nothing else, go on to our first item, which is our work session. And this is a formal presentation of the Newburgh Urban Renewal Plan and Report, which has been postponed to next week because there's some procedural things that staff wanted to work out. So the request has been made to postpone that for a week. And the next item is the review and discussion of the SEDCOR quarterly report. And we also have an online Northwest update. So we'll start with Abisha Stone, and she'll begin with our quarterly report.
Hi there, this is Abisha. I'm just trying to open my screen here. When I got promoted, I can't see anything, so I apologize for that.
Well, we can hear you, and we're here and we can hear you. So we'll work through the bugs, but we're glad you're here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And
There
hey
you
there,
are.
there
Hi.
I am. Wonderful. Good morning.
Morning.
So today we have a couple of topics that we're going to be covering. So first, I'll start by quickly reviewing our quarterly report because I want to make sure we save time to get to some of these other conversations. We also do have Kathy Tate joining us from Online Northwest to give an update on the broadband expansion project that they're working on. And I just got a message from her that she is online, so we can bring her in whenever we're ready for that. And then I also wanted to cover providing some updates and data about last year's COVID-related relief grant programs for businesses as you all continue to look forward to what would our next rounds look like and what are the impacts of those programs, and trying to identify how to structure those. So I did have a conversation with Commissioner Berschauer, and she asked me to bring forward some data. So we'll do them in that order. So I'm assuming that you all had a chance to review the document that I submitted regarding our highlights. So I'll run through them, and then of course we can have questions if you have any questions. So what I try to include in these quarterly highlight updates are the kind of the bigger projects that we're working on that you all are aware of, that you're kind of tracking. Certainly there's many other activities that are going on, and so sometimes you'll see some get repeated over and over again if it's something I want to continue to highlight with you. And sometimes, you know, we'll just kind of throw in, hey, by the way, this is also happening and it's pretty fun and exciting and we want you to know. So I continue to keep in front of you that buildable industrial land is a big priority in our region. We do have some opportunities for land that can be readied for buildability, but there is a lot of work to do there, and it will require cooperation with the county, the independent jurisdictions, and our partners at the state. So I'll continue to keep that in front of us as a project that really needs to be addressed because it is a big project that requires a lot of collaboration. We have been working very closely with several different projects that are focused on career readiness and technical education. CTech West, right? So the CTE programming that is a modeling itself very similar to the CTech in Salem that is being driven by Sheridan School District is continuing to garner partnership and interest and commitment from Yamhill County school districts. And we just found out last night, Representative David Gomberg reached out to Dory Vickery, the superintendent in Sheridan, and shared with her that they were awarded $1.9 million out of the state funds, and that was just approved through the Ways and Means Infrastructure Committee to help them continue to move that project forward. She did submit to the board a request for funding for what is their gap kind of beyond that to be able to purchase and develop out the building, which is at $3 million. And we can revisit this as we talk a little bit later about some of those projects. We did recently just meet with the SEDCOR, met with the school district and Forest River to talk about a shared programming design between the two organizations. Forest River was very engaged and very excited to know that Sheridan was investing in this CTE programming. They were excited to come up with ideas and ways that they could support it, potential projects that they could do together. The building that the school district is looking at butts up right against the backside of the Forest River building. So there is a lot of opportunity there, and they are very eager partners now. We also wanted to share the Chemeketa Community College Conjoined Hospitality and Childcare Training Program. This is an exciting opportunity that is also a very collaborative effort. Chemeketa is working to initiate a hospitality training program that supports folks that are trying to skill up in that arena and to try to promote workforce development in the hospitality arena with an emphasis on restaurants, hotels, and wineries, things like that. It's not just front of house, there's also security, cleaning and sanitation positions. So they're really trying to help people get certified training so that they can have their highest value going into the hospitality realm. That is a conjoined program. They're partnering it with childcare, so providing childcare to the folks that are going through that training program, while also embedding a childcare certification program in that location so that we can train up additional childcare service providers, get them certified, and then encourage and support them in opening up additional childcare capacity. You do have, I think I submitted as well, a document that details that program. They are currently looking for funding for this 3-year program. The folks that are getting training are there on a quarterly basis, but they're running it for 3 years. Those are 2 very exciting projects that are looking to address our very immediate and long-term need for workforce development. Quick update on the Workforce Housing Consortium. This group continues to meet regularly and is currently exploring 3 locations as potential project sites in Newburgh. We have a subcommittee that is now working on a project design proposal, and so there's more to come there. And I'm hopeful to be able to put that in front of you with an actual project to understand what we're working on in the very near future. Been partnering very closely with the City of Newburgh, Doug Rux, and Mayor Rick Rogers on developing that program, and Shannon Buckmaster. They've been very supportive, and it's a really exciting process. So hopefully more to come very soon. So we do have 2 businesses recently that have emerged in the new industry supply chain solutions category. These businesses are trying to recapture, recycle, and then reuse wine bottles in the local wine industry. Our wine industry partners are very excited about this. When we did our last business retention expansion survey, now I guess it was about 5 years ago in the county, the #1 highlighted need for the wine industry was localizing the supply chain for materials and packaging, bottles being #1. It is difficult to make bottles and satisfy the EPA requirements and all of kind of the environmental requirements. And that's one of the reasons why we don't just see eager bottle manufacturers rushing to the area. This is a very Oregon solution, right? To recapture these bottles and to wash them and reuse them and get them back into circulation. One of the partners is also working with the Oregon Bottle Recycle Organization on legislation to do an exchange return, cost exchange return on wine bottles. So this is very exciting. This is actually, it's very boots on the ground. It's very kind of technical, but it's exactly what the wine industry is hoping for. So we're excited to see these companies moving forward. Both of them are located in Yamhill County. And that leads me to the last topic, which is the update on the broadband expansion project. I have really enjoyed working with Kathy Tate on this project. She's very communicative and very educated and informed on this topic. And as you know, we also have been working closely with Sheriff Svensson on coordinating these activities with his expansion plan for emergency communications. Kathy will share more about that information. So with that, I'd like to stop talking at you and invite Kathy to join us and provide updates. I'm sorry, right before we do that though, were there any questions?
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you. I appreciate that, Abhishek, and thank you for that. And welcome, Kathy. I wanted to ask you, you were talking a little bit about the CTE and some of the hospitality and some of the training. As far as that goes, I'm wondering if you've considered, or perhaps you work in partnership with organizations that help with reentry of some of our neighbors who are coming back into the community after serving time in being incarcerated. And I know that food services oftentimes it's a great opportunity for these adults to wind up gaining employment. And I know that sometimes really it's a hard thing to make that match, but you've got willing participants.
That's a great question. That is also reentry training programs are something that I personally have experience with and wholeheartedly support. So in these conversations, we do, especially through the Shemeketa program, we are talking about unutilized and underutilized workforce, right? So that is our previously incarcerated community members who are looking for opportunities to find their next career path. And also we are looking at trying to connect with retired folks who are actually interested in maybe working very part-time or off shifts, or, you know, just to maybe keep busy or make a little extra money. But maybe they feel like, well, I can't just go ask for a job 2 days a week. In this current environment, many employers are seeking folks who are even willing to just work for 2 days a week, right? And take those shifts. And so we are looking at what are these untapped opportunities and pipelines for potential employment. And that is one of them. So thank you for that question, Commissioner.
Thank you for that. Okay. Anybody else, commissioners, before we get to Kathy?
Chair, I just wanted to say thank you for asking about that. And I know that Abisha and Superintendent Vickery have also talked with Howie Harkema about doing training on the site in off hours for folks who are currently experiencing homelessness. So just kind of using those spaces, underutilized spaces as well, to the maximum extent possible.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, Kathy. Oh, Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. Abisha, that's really great news about from Rep. Gomberg about the funds coming in, but it's my understanding, and I'm trying to remember from our conversation, but that would pay for capital improvements, right? So they still need the seed money to actually purchase the land in the former site. Is that correct?
They do, and they have a very short timeline. So they have some impending pressures in terms of timeline. They're at about 3 weeks for commitment on that property. So there is urgency behind funding on this project.
Okay, and they asked us for, I think it was 3 million using ARPA funds, but part of that, a significant part of that was for the purchase of the property. Okay, so that's something that we need to get on our calendar pretty quick, the discussion. Okay.
Yeah, and when we kind of get to that back end of this presentation, I can review that in more depth if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Kathy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity to give you an update on where we are with the grant that we received at the end of the year. I thought it would be good before I started to maybe just do a quick introduction again about Online Northwest, especially since Commissioner Berschauer wasn't on the board at the time that we got the grant. So just give you a little background about us. We're a privately held internet service provider. We started McMinnville in 1997, providing dial-up services. At that time, the playing field was pretty even, right? Everybody provided the same service, and we could compete with all of the big players in town. In the early 2000s, Comcast started providing cable, and Verizon started offering DSL. And before you knew it, a lot of people in the small cities had access to broadband service instead of dial-up. So that's broadband definition, is being connected all the time, not having a phone call knock you off the internet, you know, all of those great things. So high-speed broadband. And so it was quickly apparent once that started happening. Of course, customers were leaving dial-up and going to broadband services, but it was also apparent that all of the rural customers that we had were not going to be getting those opportunities to get broadband from Comcast and Verizon. They were not expanding out of the small cities, and there was no option at that time for any kind of broadband service. So in 2004, we started building a fixed wireless broadband network so that we could deliver high-speed internet to rural customers in Yamhill County. And actually in several counties, but primarily in Yamhill, because that's where we're headquartered at, and that's where our business is. So we have continued to grow that network over all of these years. We still continue to do that. And in 2014, we started building fiber in Yamhill County. Since we started in 2014, we built fiber to every home and business in the city of Dayton, the city of Willamina. We started construction this year in Amity and in Carlton. And we also have some fiber areas here in McMinnville at the industrial park, a few areas around McMinnville, and then some rural areas of the county, especially areas where we've built to get fiber to some of our fixed wireless tower locations so that we could have more bandwidth to those rural customers. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat this morning. So we're the only private local internet provider that's headquartered in Yamhill County. We have 30 employees at this location. We've been committed to supporting the economic vitality of our county. We support our community businesses and our neighbors, not only with broadband services, but financial support to a lot of the nonprofits and community organizations in our area. Each of our employees gets 40 hours a week to volunteer in the community, paid, and this is where we live and where our employees live, and we want to invest our time and our efforts here. So let me just give you an update on the grant. In October, we presented the grant request to Yamhill County to support a $2 million wireless broadband expansion project. This is a project that we were already working on. We're working on broadband expansion all of the time, but the opportunity to get a grant would facilitate us moving at a faster pace. So our primary goal was to do two things, and that was basically to get more access to households that maybe had inadequate options or no options for service, and then also to densify the network that we already have. So get more towers so that we could get more transmitters up and get shorter distances to get to customers, because the shorter the distance in a wireless service, the higher speeds that you can offer to customers. So by densifying our network, we get better utilization of the wireless spectrum that's available, and we get to offer higher speeds to customers. So from October till now, we have spent we've been using the $344,000 worth of spectrum and wireless equipment to expand service. So that sort of happened. The grant request came in October. The grant was signed at the end of December, but with COVID during all of this, a good portion of 2021, we've added another 378 households just in 2021 to our existing wireless customer base. So we have 2,235 wireless customers in Yamhill County right now. So those are rural customers that we're currently serving with broadband. So let's see. So I wanted to kind of share what's been happening since we received the grant in December. We've been working on our plan to roll out to execute this plan that we have. I'm going to share a document that just shows the phases that we have planned out. Can you see that? So right now, as of just this last week, we have completed phase one, which was doing our planning, finding sites that we could get the best coverage areas for tower construction, and we've finished in engineering design. We've decided that the best way to spend the dollars that we received through the grant from the county is to build new tower infrastructure that will be viable for decades into the future. We feel like it's the most prudent and long-term way to use the government dollars that are provided. We plan to use our own funds for the future expenditures for all of the equipment that's going to go on the tower and to provide service to the customers. We think that makes sense for us for that to be our part of the investment, because that equipment has a short lifespan of 3 to 5 years, and it's what we use to generate revenue from the customers. So we really wanted to use the county grant money for creating infrastructure in the county. it was our hope that in creating that infrastructure that we could coordinate with other entities that might also be interested in that infrastructure. And that's why we started talking to the Sheriff's Department. We knew that there was a plan to redesign and upgrade the emergency radio system. We knew that that included maybe expansion of some tower locations, and we were hoping that there might have been some synergy for us to work together to really utilize those dollars in the best way. We've been talking to the Sheriff's Department for maybe close to 3 months. They were in the middle of doing some planning through a third-party contractor. We just heard at the end of last week that 2 of the towers that we've just gone on to in the north, is not really where the expansion for them is going to occur. And the tower sites that we've selected in the south of the county, they are possibly have an interest in, but it's 5 to 10 years before they see that project rolling out. So unfortunately, we need to get this project going. We need to get people hooked up to broadband. And so we're just going to go ahead and move ahead with our plans. So right now we consider phase 1 completed. We're going to begin on phase 2, which is to finalize our agreements with the sites that we've selected, get easements that own those locations, complete soil sampling, which we have to do in order to, it's some other geographic types of things that we have to do to make sure that we can build a tower on a certain location and what kind of tower we can build. And then we have to secure tower construction agreements. We've already kind of gone down this path. We've done a site sample at 1 location, and we've gotten bids for tower construction. So we're on our way. We're hoping that we can get all of this wrapped up by the end of September, and then we'll start on actual tower construction. So I wanted to share a map with you so you can see the locations that we're currently looking at. I don't know. Sorry, I'm not very good at doing my screen share here. Huh. Oh. Okay, so here's the map with the tower locations in Yamhill County. Right now, we already have about 29 tower locations. Those are in the gray areas, the gray towers that you see on the map. Those are locations that we already have. So we have over 85 transmitters on 29 locations, another 10 transmitters on 4 locations that are sort of outside the county, but they shoot into the county. So the locations that we're looking at, can you see you can see my cursor on the screen? Okay, good. So there's 2 tower sites that we have already signed. These are existing tower sites that are owned by Crown Castle. One of them is here in Gaston. And while it's kind of on the edge of the county, we are planning to put transmitters all pointing into the county this way. And then the other one is on Ribbon Ridge. So we signed lease agreements there. We have ordered all of the components that need to go on those tower locations, and we have the transmitters already in stock. So those will be our first 2 locations that we will get up and running. And this will, we basically, we're looking at about a 10 to 15 mile range around each of these towers to get to existing customers and to get to new customers. And then for tower construction, we're looking at Mount Richmond, Maysara Winery, and Amity. We already have a tower in the Amity Hills, but it's not very tall. And so we found a new location, and we're going to build a much taller tower. So Mount Richmond and the Amity Tower are 170-foot towers. So that's a really large scale tower, but it needs to be that high to get over all of the trees that are in the area. And that's why we wanted to try to see if we could work with the sheriff's department, because if the sheriff's department needed a 200-foot tower, we didn't want to build a 170-foot tower and then later find out that, you know, they needed 30 more feet. So that was kind of why those discussions took place for that period of time. We feel like when we get done with this project, our wireless network will cover about 90% of the county where there are households. There is a large majority of our county, especially over in this area, of course, where there is little to no households. And covering that area is kind of a futile effort when it comes to wireless. Wireless will not go through, you know, large amounts of trees. It won't go through land mass. And so when you have all of these hills and valleys and heavily forested areas, that is not a place where you're going to have success with a fixed wireless product. So it is a really big challenge in parts of Yamhill County. But we feel like for the part of the county that is, you know, that has households, that we will end up being at about 90% coverage when we're finished. Let's see, as we're continuing to expand our wireless network, you know, we're also continuing to build fiber every single day. It's always been our plan to, you know, continue to expand fiber in Yamhill County. It's clear from the conversations at the FCC that right now the definition of broadband is 25 down and 3 up, but they're talking in the very near future about changing that to 100 and 100. And that is clearly a definition for fiber. There are very few other, if any, other products that can do that right now. And that's just going to continue to increase into the future. So I feel like the government is telling us that, you know, we need to have fiber everywhere for everybody, and that's the long-term goal. We're just going to keep building fiber and keep working on our wireless network, and our hope is that those two products that we're working on are going to continue to get closer and closer and overlap in some areas, and that eventually, you know, fiber will be the larger majority of the service that we provide here. But a lot of that depends on funding, either our own private funding or funding through grants or funding through other opportunities, because building fiber is extremely expensive and not something that that we could do quickly or with a small budget. So you know, we look forward to continuing to work with Yamhill County. We want to be part of the broadband conversation, and we want to, you know, be leading in that area. And you know, we're excited to work with the county and any other, you know, entities on that process as we move forward. So yeah, so that's what I have to report right now. And it's been a little slow getting off, but again, we're trying to do the best job we can, spending the money that we received. And we just felt like it was prudent to take a little time to make some good decisions about collaboration before we jumped off. So any questions?
Thank you. Thanks for that, Kathy. A question, the 378 homes that are now covered, where are those?
Well, we added 378 customers in our existing footprint, right? So I mean, I don't have an answer for exactly where they all are, but in the course of the pandemic, we had we bought that spectrum through the auction last year, and so we also bought transmitters that would operate in that spectrum, and then we put them up on some of our major tower locations throughout the county. Down in the south on this Eola Hills Tower and a High Heaven, which is right in the middle of the county. That's our largest tower with the most transmitters on it. So we put those new access points with that, using that new frequency that's available that we bought at auction. And then we were able to pick up more customers in our existing footprint than we had previously, because we had a different product that could perform differently. If that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
Commissioners, questions for Kathy?
Chair, I have a question.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Kathy. It's really good to see both the background and what you're working on with the funding that we provided. And I know that the three of us, commissioners, have talked about wanting to invest in things with the American Rescue Plan dollars that are going to provide a long-term benefit to the community. And so I'm glad that even though these aren't American Rescue Plan dollars, that you're thinking similarly. So thank you. One of the things that when I talk with people in the community about broadband and higher speed internet is they often come back to Starlink.
Mm.
And there are many versions of the truth around it.
Yeah.
Can you and so some of the strongest responses are, why are we bothering with wires in the ground when Starlink exists? Can you, as delicately or as expansively as you want, address that?
I can, and I'm not a Starlink expert either, but I do belong to a lot of broadband associations. I talk to a lot of people that own broadband companies all across the United States, do a lot of reading, get a lot of information about various things. I think that I've also talked to people who have Starlink, and I have an employee who's using Starlink who can't get our service, from where they live. So those are my touch points for that. What I will say is a couple things. It's satellite internet, and it's got latency. It's never going to have the latency that fiber has. So what latency is how long does it take the data to go out to where it needs to go and come back. And when you're doing, especially when you're doing things that require like using a private network. So if you're remoting into your work network, or if you're doing online school where you're using some sort of a server application or something, those types of things, and even streaming to some extent, they expect to have latency that is consistent and steady. So anytime there's a slight drop in a signal where all of a sudden it takes longer for that packet of information to go out or come back, it's suspected that there may be some sort of an issue with the connection, perhaps a security issue, or just you've lost so many packets that the quality of what you're doing is lost. So like when your video buffers, or when you lose signal for a couple minutes or a few seconds, then that can cause a loss of signal. So it's, at this point, I think the stability of the connection is questionable. And then I think a couple other things. The Pacific Northwest is beautiful. That's why we all live here. So many trees. And just the same types of issues that we have with our fixed wireless service is the types of issues that satellite is going to have. And even to complicate it just a little bit more, satellites move, right? So they're a moving target. So we have customers that we provide fixed wireless service to that live sometimes in the middle of a forest. But for whatever reason, we have this narrow gap where we can see like through, a few sets of trees and get to a tower location, and we can just aim a signal, straight at that, and we can get them service. Now, if the branches grow or the trees grow together or get too tall, sometimes we tell people, if you want to keep service, you need to get a tree trimmer. But if you have satellite and it's coming from, it's coming through a certain gap in the trees to your location, what happens as the satellite moves, right? Because then that gap doesn't move with the satellite, and pretty soon it's, there's getting through some trees becomes sort of an issue. I think there's questions about weather, weather related. We certainly have some issues sometimes with wireless service. We call it rain fade. If it's, raining just buckets, that can cause issues. And also with all of the, trees that we have that have pine needles on them and such, water collects on them. And so during the summer, we can get through like some light foliage, but in the winter time, if there's rain or ice that, really builds up on some of this foliage, that can cause, signal loss as well. So I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Technology is an amazing thing, and they, the things that they're developing are crazy, but I can tell you that, fiber in the ground is going to be around for, the glass that we're putting in the ground right now, the fiber that we're installing, it's going to be there for 50 years. And the only thing that's going to change and will continue to change is the electronics that go through that, that go on either ends of that fiber. And who knows where that's going, but it's going to continue to change. And I don't know that any other technology is going to be able to keep up with what's going to happen in the future other than fiber. So.
Thank you, commissioners. Any other questions for Kathy? Well, Kathy, thank you very much. That was a very elaborate presentation, and I appreciate the detail because we've been talking about having you join us for a while now. So thank you for that. And any other questions for Abhishek? Did you want to basically just give us some parting words, Abhishek, before we move on?
I do still have a bit of presentation to offer regarding last year's grant programs and data capture.
Oh, yes. Okay, great. Thank you for that, Kathy. Yes. Okay. Yes. Thanks a lot. Okay, Abhishek. Yes.
Okay, so I will share my screen as Kathy's is removed here. So just a reminder, the background on the data I'm about to share with you. This information comes from last year's immediate relief grant program and the round 3 funds. And what we titled round 3 funds were that kind of like 12th hour funding that came from the state for immediate business relief as businesses had kind of been shut down again in December of last year. So we have the immediate relief grant program that the county hosted in April, and then we had that kind of November, December 12th hour funding that's called round 3. So the data I'm about to show you is entirely captured last year. I know that the board talked about going back to businesses and doing another survey and saying, how have things gone? What do you currently need going forward? That has, we can ask Ken for updates on that, but that is not a part of the data I'm showing you here. So I will try to go quickly through this and offer more opportunity for questions if they exist. So one of the things I wanted to make sure that was highlighted and understood as we think about how do we allocate funds is that both the IRGP and the round 3 fundings were allocated throughout the county on a population-based model. And this was put in front of the board as a recommendation to make sure that we were targeting funding in every community throughout the county. And this is how we did that, right? So we took population census data from 2010 because it was the certified data that we had at the time. And we basically assigned what percentage of the total population each community occupied. We took the funding that we had at the time and we divided that out based on that population allocation. And then we said, however, we want to make sure there's a no less than target, right? We want to make sure each community has no less than 2 is how we looked at that. So if you look at this, for example, the city of Yamhill, 1% of the population would have been awarded $2,241. We were giving $2,500 awards. That would have been less than 1 award. We said, you know what? Our goal is to make sure that we're distributing these funds across the county. So we're going to put our money where our mouth is and kind of give a no less than. So this was the allocation model, right? This isn't necessarily the distribution model. Last year, you saw what the data looked like coming out of the IRGP, and the actual distribution model looked something more like this, very close to the allocation model, with the exception of a couple of cities that we had, for example, the city of Sheridan, that was undersubscribed. So when Commissioner Bershauer came to me and said, what problems did we have communicating about the grants and reaching different businesses? These are the areas that we look at. We say, well, gosh, in the city of Sheridan, if we look back, they were actually allocated 6%, right? $15,000, but they only had 2 applicants. This wasn't a matter of us only recommending award for 2 businesses. They only had 2 applicants. So we have to look at that and say, what can we do to improve communication in that area? We also saw that the greater Yamhill County area was undersubscribed in the first grant. And then through the second, third, kind of the multiple rounds of grants that we offered last year, we expanded our marketing in the areas that were undersubscribed. So this was how we structured the IRGP grants. Then when round 3 came about, we said, let's structure it similarly with some exceptions. So we took that same allocation model, identifying total funds per region. We took that $10,000 award amount and the no less than approach. And then we actually did a tiered approach to the round 3 funds. And as a reminder, what was that tiered approach? So the board said at the time we were doing that, right? We said, we want to make sure we're reaching all parts of the county. And at the same time, we want to prioritize. So we said, we want to make sure that we are highlighting tier 1 for-profit businesses that were prohibited from operating, right? So 100% closure during that November 18th to December 2nd executive order. Tier 2 was for-profit businesses that experienced a significant disruption in their operation. And then tier 3 was everyone else. So when it came to priority eligibility, we used that tiering structure and made sure that we were trying to prioritize. We wanted to fund all of tier 1, then all of tier 2, and if we had any money left, tier 3, right? Based on this allocation model. It was complex, but it was clear. It was clearly communicated. It was clearly communicated on the website. And I believe that the county team did a great job of adhering to this process. This was how it played out in the end. So you'll see here, for example, the city of Amity was only allocated 2%, but because of that tiered prioritization, they actually received 11 awards in the city of Amity because they had a lot of tier 2. So we did all of tier 1, then all of tier 2 from each region. So that was how we did that approach. Each of these were done through a lottery draw process. So we had the allocation model, we had our priorities, we got applications from each region. Each region had a lottery, right? So we went through and did the lottery draw and managed that process of tiered prioritization for both of these programs. The next question I was reviewing with Commissioner Bershauer was around what did the businesses need? What do they still need? What were they using the funding for, right? So we did survey the businesses from the Immediate Relief Grant Program, and we asked them, what do you need going forward? What are the concerns that you have for your business? What do you need going forward? And these are the things that they expressed to us. We were still mid-pandemic. There was a lot of fear around multiple closures, lack of tourism. They were afraid their employees wouldn't come back. Some things we saw play out. In terms of support, they were talking very clearly about funding operations to ramp back up. So grants to help them get going, right? So you're talking about restaurants, for example, that lost all of their food inventory and had to repurchase all of their food inventory to start again, right? Those ramp up sort of expenses. Many of them were talking about tax deferrals and extensions on SBA loan programs, things like that. This would really help us. They wanted to reinvent or re-envision their sales model. They needed more business-to-business connectivity, more training on how to do that. How do we go to an online platform? They wanted help with utility cost breaks and insurance payouts for losses related to COVID. So a lot of this was kind of in that legislative realm, ability to deploy their own reasonable social distancing measures, right? They were asking to be included in the conversation. So some of these were very clearly related to real-time pandemic outbreak. We're struggling, right? So wanting to be involved in the conversation, deploy their own social distancing measures. Many of these we're still seeing play out right now, where people are still looking, hey, is there anything insurance can do? What can we do to get tax deferrals, extensions on loan programs, right? They still are looking for these things and help with employment. So that was from the IRGP program. In the round 3 grant program, so this was the end of the year last year, we asked them as a part of the application process, what do you plan to spend the money for, right? What are you going to spend the money on? And these were the top 6 in order of percentage of responses. So it was to cover costs for rent, so lease and utilities. And even still, this was before there was extensions on the rental assistance program. It was before the state, right, issued additional programming around that. But many people didn't want to seek that funding. They wanted to pay their rent because they didn't want their renters, their landlords, to at any time in the next year have any reason for wanting to increase their rent or push them out, right? They really care about those relationships. They also wanted to make sure that they were paying their employees. They wanted to keep their employees working. They wanted to make sure that they were getting paid, and that as if they had to transition them to unemployment, that they weren't behind on what they owed their employees when they did that. Buy supplies and pay vendors. Again, really important relationships. They want to make sure those vendors were paid. Again, expenses to change the business model, new marketing and sales approaches, general overhead, and then startup costs for reopening their business. So these were the top 6. And really the greatest number of responses were in those top 2 or 3. The greatest number of responses, right? We had some other kind of interesting comments. Some people wanted to make sure they were paying their employees' insurance premiums and things like that, but they were few and far between. These were very much so the top 3. One last thing that I want to make sure I point out is that when I saw how this played out in terms of number of applicants, again, Commissioner Bershauer was talking to me about marketing. How are we going to communicate these programs? How are we going to make sure we reach the folks that weren't reached? What was really evident to me was that when the state announced this round 3 funding, it was impactful. It was very effective, right? So the state, yes, it blew up. We were receiving phone calls. I was getting calls on the weekends and the evenings. Carrie Martin, our phones were just blowing up, right? So the state announced it very publicly. It was on every news channel. It was on every radio station. The state actually put a web page up that tracked each county that was hosting a grant program with a single click to the grant program. So at Ken's request, we got listed on that right away. So we really collaborated and worked very closely, SEDCOR did, with Ken and Carrie and other staff to make sure that we were communicating about this program. But it was because of the state announcing the program that really drove a lot of interest, and we had a much higher response. So I think that I covered all of the things that you all were hoping I would cover. The last thing to talk about was just that marketing, right? How do we make sure that we're marketing to these businesses? So we have taken a multi-tiered approach to marketing the work that we're doing, and especially around grant programs. And we've looked at that. I have a document here. I'm going to try to see if I can pull it up. We've looked at that differently post-pandemic. Some of the areas where we know that we struggled, that we need to improve, is in communicating with our ESL business owners, right? So that could be primary Spanish speaking, it could be primary Russian speaking. We did translate many documents last year in terms of the marketing of the programs, but we did not have translation of the actual grant program, the application itself. And that was a barrier. That really was a barrier to many people applying. So that's an area where we need to focus. We did pretty extensive work working with all of our print news partners. So every print news partner in the county, we made sure they had access to the information. We paid for some of those articles. We asked them to, you know, graciously write articles. We actually reached out to the West Valley Gazette, I believe it's called, which is the newsletter paper that they have out in Sheridan, right? So we made sure it was posted there. We worked with all of our individual municipalities, asking them to post the information in public places. We did a very big social media push. We worked with some of our Spanish speaking radio stations out of Woodburn and asked them to publicize it, and they did. We also worked with our partners at the City of Woodburn to get most of our documents translated, which they did for us pro bono and very quickly, and we were grateful to have them do that. So what would we do differently, right? So what we're looking at are targeted social media campaigns. Commissioner Bershauer, I appreciate you asking me to look into that. It is a complicated thing to do, but not impossible, right? Because it depends on who we're trying to reach. So what it comes down to is what sort of programs does the county want to host? And then who are we trying to reach with those programs? Then we design an approach that works for them. The only other thing that I would say that I think would be more effective post-pandemic than mid-pandemic is the community center approach. So we could not post about this at the library, at any of the churches, at any of the schools, because nobody was congregating in those spaces. And we really try to communicate in those community spaces about programs like this, because that's where word of mouth happens and people start to learn about things. So I've talked for a long time. I will stop there and ask if there are any questions that you have about the information I just shared.
Commissioners.
This is super helpful, Abhishek, or Chair, if you don't mind. I found this to be very helpful. Thank you. I knew anecdotal some of this, but to have it compiled by you. And I also want to thank Commissioner Bershauer for working with you on that. I really appreciate it. So thanks for doing that. And I think that the only thing that I had like a real question about, but it probably is because of the tier 1 and tier 2 categories and eligibility, is how there were only 3 awards in unincorporated county for the round 3 funding. But I assume it's because of those very specific like closure and business loss. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I am pulling that up right now to make sure I answer that appropriately. I have to look at Yamhill City versus unincorporated. So there was the notes that I have are there was no draw, all applicants were funded, meaning we only received 3 applications. So they were undersubscribed, right? So yeah. The city of Sheridan and the county at large were consistently undersubscribed.
Okay, that's what I was guessing. That's what that meant, is simply that there's, I mean, as you talked about, the shortage of commercial and industrial land out in the county is related to that, right? There aren't a lot of businesses in those categories. I do know that there are wedding venues, but okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Abhishek, thank you for that. I appreciate that. A couple of questions. Have we maybe done a little bit of a survey as far as how did you find out about this, so we could see where the most effective venues were for getting people to look into these? Because I thought it was I was concerned that, like I call the little guys, weren't getting word, because we have people who are professional grant applicants, and there are those who never ever get word or don't even know how to do this. So I think that it was very comprehensive what you did, but I'm wondering what was successful. And the other factor was the PPP and how that factored in terms of, did you look at who applied for that and comparing who applied for these?
Yeah, great questions. Thank you for that. So we did survey the Immediate Relief Grant Program, the IRGP folks, on where did they hear about it. I don't have that data compiled in terms of kind of hierarchy of what was the most effective. I just don't have the chart created. I'm happy to do that and get it back to you. When I looked at that most recently, my recollection was that most of the folks did hear about it through either the newspaper, these meetings, or the Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Association, MEDPs, SEDCORs, right? The C6 organizations that support this sort of work. But I can get that information for you, and I will definitely chart that out. Then the second question about PPP. When we did the IRGP program at the time, PPP was just rolling out. And so people had not received word of award yet of PPP. So we decided not to ask the question about whether or not they applied, because that did not indicate success in their application. And it didn't necessarily indicate that all of their needs were met through that process. And we weren't quite sure how to quantify that. So we did not, we did ask the question of what other, we were trying to encourage folks to apply who also had been actively seeking resources while educating them about potential resources. So we did have questions that said, what else have you done to try to support your business in this time? Have you applied for PPP funds? Have you applied for EIDL? Have you reached out to your utility service providers to ask them about programs that they have to help you financially there? Have you spoken to the person who's your leaseholder about forgiveness on rent or delayed payment? So, and there may have been one or two more, but we asked those questions again to give them a sense of, gosh, I haven't done that, maybe I should, and also to track what they had already tried to do. Most respondents had at least two of those questions, right, that they checked. But again, that is data that I can pull for you if you're interested in seeing. But again, it doesn't tell us, did they receive funds or how much did they get?
Oh, sorry.
If I may, Chair, and I would just add that with the program, when it came out, there was a fairly quick turnaround when the state announced that this funding was going to be made available. And the criteria and the eligibility, you know, it did not specifically exclude businesses that may have gotten PPP funds. And the board didn't, you know, the only extra layer that was added to the program that we rolled out on this 3 was to impacted eligibility. The only additional item that was added that wasn't necessarily, that went above and beyond some of the ineligibility that the state had put on the CRF funds, was specifically related to those programs that had received a grant earlier. You know, we had a second round of grant that we did awards, and the board, well, we just funded these, we want to capture some of the other ones that didn't get an opportunity to apply or weren't awarded funds. So that was the only additional eligibility requirement that the board had added at that time when we posted this round 3 program.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see if folks were aware of a PPP program and maybe not aware of what we were offering or some of the other options. Is what is the difference in how they were notified of those or became aware of those? I thought it might be interesting.
Yeah, that's a great question, because many of them were made aware of them by their banking institutions or by, again, that public federal and state announcement, which just reached everyone.
Right.
But we started reaching out to our banking institution and our utilities partners and sending them also our advertisements about the programs and asking them to share them with customers in the region, which several of them were really eager to do. Northwest Natural, for example, was a good partner in that and tried to help us support us in the IRGP program. And then PGE also was very active in seeking an understanding of what programs were available so that they could share them with their partners. But yes, that's a great way to think about that, Commissioner Sterrett, because if the state supported ongoing our desire to communicate effectively with our business owners about potential programs, the way that they did last year doing those couple of efforts that they were driving, it would be more impactful in communicating to these folks, because we don't necessarily have the ear of KGW, but Governor Brown certainly does.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. So this for me, because you guys were a part of this last year before I was here. So this for me, the analysis that Abhishek put together really answered a lot of questions, and it made me feel good about where the money went and how it was divvied up, especially in such a tight timeline. There's always ways to improve, but I feel really good about the way that it went out the door. And you know, certainly the same or similar process would inform our decisions going forward if we choose to hand out grants again. I'm not sure, and this isn't on our discussion right now, but I'm not sure that this necessarily indicates that there is an overwhelming need for another cash grant type of program. And Abhishek and I talked about that. So that's just, you know, for me, I'm not getting that sense from some of this information, or at least anecdotally coming from chambers and stuff like that. But again, that's, you know, we can talk about that later. But I do appreciate the information, and thank you for putting it together.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, thank you, Abhishek. I appreciate that. And we've been, this has been a long process. And I know that a lot of people at the county, including our administrators, sitting there writing checks, and it was a very laborious process, but thank you for the work on that. We appreciate it.
You bet. It was a very difficult process, and county staff was phenomenal in managing it. And even the accounting folks, you know, cutting checks, 12th hour. I mean, just were phenomenal to work with. And the county's commitment to the online application system for the grant programs was instrumental in pulling it off. So I'm grateful to the county for that. So I will leave you with just a couple of last words. The first is being that when you are at a place where you're ready to consider specific sorts of grant programs, I would be happy to present recommendations, whether that's cash grants or program-based business support grants. Obviously, I would work closely with staff, but I'm happy to put proposals in front of you for you to consider. And then the last comment was just referencing back to CTech West and the Chemeketa Community College programs. Commissioner Berschauer did ask me to bring forward any programs that were workforce development related, that were business impact in terms of programming, that also had some short timelines, and we're seeking funding. Both of these programs have been submitted to you or a group of you, or, you know, I'm hoping you've all seen both of these by now, but because they've come through various different streams. So it's not anything that you're not aware of, but I did want to reinforce that these are two programs that really are working to meet the long-term need, right? So also affecting our kids and our grandkids and creating structure that does that. And so, but also meets the immediate needs for our industry. Number one, highest highlighted need is access to trained or trainable workforce. That's what our businesses need, workforce. So thank you again for the time to share. I appreciate it. I know we took a lot of time, but there was a lot to cover. So thank you for your patience.
Thanks very much, Abhishek. Okay, we'll move on to department updates, and we have none. On to our consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
Chair,
Yes.
sorry, Chair, if I could suggest in the interests of, because we had the Transit Board of Directors, it's completely up to the board, but if you would like to move items under subsection I1, 2, and 3 to the consent agenda, that was something that you had discussed, and I'm just thinking in the interest of time for the meeting.
Great idea.
And just with the added additional language that item I3 that would be moved up to consent agenda would be subject to final review and approval at County Counsel's office.
Sounds good.
And Chair, we got the really very familiar thumbs up from County Counsel on that one. So.
He said it's okay. Thank you for that suggestion,
Well,
Ken.
Chair, I would move that we approve the modified consent agenda, including conditioning I3 on final approval of County Council. Did I get it right?
Yes, looks good. Thank you. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Chair.
Aye. Motion passes. So we are, oh yes, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to make sure that because the Sheriff's Office fee schedule is a part of the consent agenda, and I want to make sure people know that there is no increase to CHL fees or CHL renewals.
Well, I emailed Emily and I said, can you clarify this $65? And she said, no, that's no increase. Okay, so thank you for that. I appreciate that. All righty, where are we now? I am lost my place here. Other business, we've got those.
Old business H1 is the
Okay.
next item on the agenda.
Okay, thank you for that. H1, old business, is just consideration of the adoption of the written findings and conditions in the matter of upholding the planning director's approval and denying the appeal of planning docket FT 13-20, approval of a forest template dwelling, and the applicant is Catherine Wright, representing Loyola Heights LLC, and the appellant is Thousand Friends of Oregon, tax lot 5435-600, continued from June 10th, 2021. Ken?
Madam Chair, I would address that.
Okay, Todd. Thank you.
The findings that you received on Monday, those have not been amended. I didn't get any requests for amendment on those. I just wanted to note, though, there was an addition to condition 6 that is part of the findings that I provided the draft of that was amended by the applicant. And it's the access road driveway to the dwelling is going to be via a easement from Mayette Drive, is what it says. That's because the previous condition did not specify Mayette Drive, and when the applicant negotiated with their neighbor, part of the agreement was that the access would not be from Cherry Drive. So the applicant has agreed to that condition, and it was included in the draft that you received.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Todd. Do we have a motion? Item H1.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion to approve item H1, consideration of adoption of the findings and the conditions of the matter of upholding the planning director's approval of FT 13-20. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you, Todd. Motion passes. On to item H2, we have decided to move this until next week. So we will move on to item I, which is other business. And we've addressed 2 of those, 1, 2, 3. And now we're on to item I4, which is consideration of approval of the appointment of Tanya Johnson and the reappointment of Suey Linsmeyer to the Yamhill County Board of Health, each to a 4-year term to expire February 1st, 2025. If there's no discussion, I'll move that we approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Okay.
Motion passes, and we thank them for serving. Item I5, consideration of the approval of a resolution adopting the Yamhill County budget for fiscal year 2021-22. And Ken, is this just a really happy day for you?
Well, it's definitely the finishing line of a process that the budget team and I and departments, the budget team and I, we really start the budget process in October of last year. And so it's a lengthy process and a lot involved in getting us to this point to get the budget ready for adoption prior to July 1. So unfortunately, while, for a lot of the departments and a lot, we still have a lot of work to do as far as year end, current year closeout and then starting for the new year. But again, I'm really pleased to have the resolution and the appropriation schedule in the packet and before you to adopt budget for next fiscal year.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I move that we approve resolution 21-06-24-1, adopting the Yamhill County budget for fiscal year 2021-22.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you all for your hard work in our finance department and staff and our administrator. So let us move on. Does anybody want to take a 5-minute break before we move into our public hearing? Would that
I'd
be
be happy to do that.
okay? So let's just take a 5-minute break, and that would bring us back at 11:19. We'll take a short break. Okay, we can go ahead and get started. We are back. It's June 24th. Yamhill County Board 2021, Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session at the point of a public hearing. I'll open up the public hearing, which is item J. The consideration of docket PAZ-01-21, which is the approval of a comprehensive plan amendment from very low density residential to industrial and a zone change from VLDR 2.5 very low density residential to light industrial. The applicant is Thomas Henry Stewart and the tax lot is 3325BD-200. The location is 209 Highway 99W in Dundee. So we'll go ahead and start with the call for abstentions by members of the board. Any members of the board have anything to declare as far as an abstention? Okay, none. Are there any objections to the jurisdiction of the board to hear the matter before it? Does any board member need to announce and state on the record the substance of any ex parte contact or any site visits? All righty. Todd?
I believe Ken Friday is going to read the.
Ken's going to do that. Ken Friday, our planner.
Yes.
Hi, Ken.
Oregon law requires that persons who attend a land use hearing be advised of certain rights and duties before the hearing begins. First, with regard to the standards for approval, state law ORS 197.763 requires that we list the applicable substantive criteria that must be met in order for the county to approve the application. And those standards will be listed by Stephanie Armstrong during her staff report. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the standards for approval. Second, the raise it or waive it rule. Under Oregon law, any issue that might be raised in an appeal of the county's decision in this matter must be raised before the record of this hearing is closed. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the board based on that issue. Third, and this is directed to the applicant under ORS 197.796, failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval, again with sufficient specificity to allow the county to respond to the issue, precludes an action for damages in circuit court.
Thank you, Mr. Friday. Appreciate that. Do we have a staff report?
We do.
Hi, Stephanie. Thanks.
Good morning. As you know, this is an application that the board voted to tentatively deny at the April 22nd hearing. Following that decision, the applicant, Mr. Stewart, asked the board for a reconsideration and that request was granted. The applicant provided additional information based on the concerns that were expressed by the board at the hearing. This included submittal of a landscaping plan to address the appearance of the business and its location at the edge of the city of Dundee, a revised land needs and alternative site analysis performed by Johnson Economics. The analysis concluded that there is an ongoing need for the uses that are allowed in the LI zone. However, 85% of LI zone land is already developed with light industrial uses, and those that are not developed or that are only partially developed are not as well suited and or not available. Additionally, potential sites within the cities of Dundee and Newburgh were also considered and found that there are no available properties within the cities. A new transportation planning rule or TPR analysis prepared by Chris Clemo was also submitted. The analysis found that there would be no significant effect to the transportation system, largely due to the high capacity of Highway 99W and the small size of the subject property. This application is subject to sections 502, 702, and 1208.02 of the Yamhill County zoning ordinance. Section 904, the limited use overlay, may also be applied, and comprehensive plan policies may be applicable, and OER 660-12-0060, the transportation planning rule. And that concludes the staff report.
Thank you, Stephanie. So we'll begin with the applicant's case, and Mr. Stevenson, I understand you're going to begin. Could you give us your name and your title and your address for the record, please? Thank you.
Certainly, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. My name is Garrett Stevenson, representing the applicant today. The address is 1211 Southwest 5th Avenue, Suite 1900, Portland, Oregon 97204. And again, this is the board's second consideration of a proposed change in zoning from very low density residential 2.5 to light industrial for Tom Stewart. And unlike last hearing, we've got a full group behind us able to answer any questions you may have. I've got the applicant, Tom Stewart, on the line, and he's going to speak briefly after I give my introduction. We also have Daniel Danachich, who's the land use planner on this case, Chris Clemo, who's our transportation engineer, and Brendan Buckley with Johnson Economics, who performed not only this particular study that we commissioned over the last 8 weeks, but also a study for the AAA, I believe it was the AAA application that this board approved back in April of 2004. And I'll speak more about that briefly. Just a couple of procedural matters I wanted to quickly address. Again, this is a very much appreciated second opportunity to present our project to the board. This was, as you were explained by staff and as was explained at the last hearing, which was on April 22nd, this is an application that staff recommended approval of and that the Planning Commission heard and also recommended approval of. We understand the board had some concerns, particularly about the land needs analysis that was done in the initial application and also with some issues related to traffic and a few other things. So what we actually did is we actually identified each of those concerns based on the board's oral deliberations, and we sort of broke those concerns into different buckets, and we went out and sharpened our pencils. We were able to hire Johnson Economics and Chris Clemo, who were able to very quickly produce what I think is a much better analysis than what was before the board originally, and of the similar quality and sophistication that the board heard with that AAA application. You should have in your packet 2 letters. The first is dated June 16th, and it probably comes as no surprise to this board that trying to pull this all together within 6 to 8 weeks is kind of a mighty lift. So we wanted to give the board the earliest opportunity to review our materials. We sent those to staff on June 16th, and I provided the kind of the best overview I could with the time available. But that enclosed the updated economics analysis by Johnson Economics, a new proposed landscape plan, Mr. Clemo's transportation impact analysis, and a map which I think is going to be of interest to the board, which shows Oregon Paving's market area, and that has some implications on site selection for us. When I took a look at the agenda for this week, it appeared that we were not on it quite yet, and we also submitted a letter on June 22nd, and the purpose of that June 22nd letter was to explain to the board how these materials address the board's concerns that were raised on that April 22nd hearing. We also included in that second letter the prior Johnson Economics analysis, a memo from Mr. Danachich explaining some potential sites that we looked at in Dundee and Newburgh, and some additional information on the septic system and the potential for truck traffic. Now, we worked with staff to make sure that you should have all these materials in front of you, but I don't know if they were included in the board's actual packet. So before I jump into it, I just would like to ask the board, have you had the opportunity to look at these materials? Because we think it's really important that you are afforded enough time to review. And part of it is just having to pull it all together relatively quickly, but unfortunately, I think that the official packet that you received didn't include those materials.
Commissioners, concerns?
I feel comfortable, Chair, with what I've seen so far.
Thank you.
Yeah, the packet that we received was considerable. It was about 50 pages long.
Commissioner Bershaw, would you repeat that? You broke up there for a minute.
Chair, I was just going to say that the packet, the supplemental package we received was about 56 pages long, and that's the most recent that I have been aware of.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
And Commissioner Berchow, I apologize for the link there. The really important part is the written letter on the very front of it, which I think is about 8 pages. And I did try to break things apart based on the concerns that the board articulated on April 22nd. So, Commissioner Berchow, would you feel comfortable moving forward? Do you feel like you've had enough time to look at that, or would you prefer pushing it out another week so you have that opportunity?
Garrett, I'm fine moving forward. I was just confused that you might have been talking about something in addition to that came later. So I think we're moving forward.
Thank you. Thanks,
Okay.
Commissioners. Okay, Mr. Stevenson, yes, go ahead.
Terrific. Thanks. So before I think what is going to be the most helpful for the board, or at least I hope is most helpful for the board, is for me to address the board's concerns as we understood them as related to us on April 22nd. But before I do that, I think it might be helpful to ground us on what we're actually talking about in terms of the proposed development. And for that, I would beg the board's indulgence and allow my client, Tom Stewart, to give a very brief overview and a reminder of what he's trying to do here. Once he's concluded that, he'll pass the mic back to me and we can go through the criteria issues.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart, would you give us your name and address for the record, please?
Oh, hello.
Hi,
Hello?
go ahead. Mr. Stewart, could you give us your name and your address for the record, please?
My name is Thomas Stewart, and my address is 24415 Northeast Roman Lane, Newburgh, 97132.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can you guys see me? Because I can't see. I just see a
can't
blank
see-
screen.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, that's just as good. My hair's a mess with the heat. Good morning. Thank you, Commissioner, people, for giving me this opportunity to come back again and propose my case, what I want to do. Casey can, hello, and nice to know if you do become governor, that I could always have a story to say, hey, the governor approved my property. It'd be something, I just want to say, I'm the owner of Oregon Paving, and I bought this property eyes wide shut. If I knew I needed to do a lot of this stuff beforehand, I would have definitely taken care of it and addressed anything before I purchased the property. My business, I'm a small paving company. I'm local in the town, in the community, and I'd like to keep everything there on site. My house is right around the corner from the property, and I just need somewhere where everything is close, where I keep an eye on everything for nowadays and whatnot. I have one large dump truck that hauls my equipment, my paving machine and my roller, my excavator, and that goes to the jobs with me every day. 80% of the time I'm on larger projects, so I leave my equipment on site. So not all my equipment will be at my yard 24 hours a day or whatnot. I have another small little truck that leaves with me that holds all my tools. And I have another truck that hauls like debris when I'm all done with a job, the cleanup truck. I'm willing to put any kind of screening and stuff like that we would need for, such as the barrier, so everybody could see what's not going on in there. And all the landscaping will be done. And I would love to stay in the community and everything else. And everything is perfect for me to stay on 99 to go into the city and where most of my projects are. Everything's all in towards the city, Multnomah, so on and so forth. And where everything is off that side road, I did not know that everything went like this. I was new to all this stuff, and I don't know what if the land gets changed, I'd really, really appreciate it. And I'd love to have the opportunity that you guys did take my case again and hear me out and agree with what we could do here.
Well, thank you for that. Commissioners, any particular questions for Mr. Stewart? Thank you for that. All righty. So Dan, do you want to speak next?
Chair Starrett,
Yes. Oh, sorry. You
I
wanted
was going to actually
Sorry
take it
about
up
that.
again so I could
Yes,
give you
thank
guys a brief overview of what you have in your materials. So I want to begin speaking a little bit about the land needs analysis and the alternatives analysis. And to ground that discussion, I kind of want to just explain what the criteria, at least in our view, really require here. And there's a couple of analyses that are required by the criteria. The first one is whether there's a need for light industrial land in the county as a general matter. And that need has been consistently identified by Johnson Economics, both in that April 4th application, which the board approved, and in ours again. And then the second primary question is, are there any other sites with appropriate zoning that are both suitable and available for the proposed use in the county? Now, we had an initial analysis with a 2-mile radius that Mr. Danachich provided. Staff concurred with that analysis. The board found that it wanted additional information and a bit more detail on that. And so what we have in the record now is analysis that looks at the entire county and evaluates all available light industrial areas within Yamhill County. And what's interesting is that it actually found that since the last analysis, which I believe was done in October, November of 2020, there's actually less available light industrial land now than there was then. At this point, the county has consumed approximately 85% of its light industrial land. The analysis also looked at the alternative sites that it identified. And when we look at alternative sites, we're looking for a number of things. First and foremost for this project is we're looking at access. Can we get onto 99W? Because this is a business that is looking to have the shortest route and the most expedient trip to its market area that's possible. We're looking at visibility, so you can actually use your access. We're looking at making sure that where the site is located is consistent with surrounding development. So obviously, I think it's intuitive amongst everybody here that we wouldn't necessarily want this right in the middle of a neighborhood. And so in your packet, you have that alternative site analysis that was prepared by Johnson Economics, which looked at those 4 sites and for a number of reasons for each found that those are not suitable for the proposed use. And the other thing I would mention is the criteria also ask us whether or not these sites are available. And we have no evidence and have found no evidence that these sites are in fact on the market or otherwise available. But we took a fairly liberal approach and assumed for the purposes of our analysis that they all could be purchased. Obviously, we don't know that that's true or whether any of them could actually be purchased. A couple of the sites are associated with existing development. Those are always very, very tricky to work with. And Brendan Buckley, in his memo, explains why in more detail. The second analysis that you have in the record was a supplementary one done by Mr. Danachich, which looked at some potentially adaptable sites within the cities of Newburgh and Dundee. It's our position that the criteria, as they're strictly written, don't require that, but we did that analysis anyway. And a couple notes on that. In Dundee, there is no zoning that would allow this use outright. So that's a bit of a dead letter for us in Dundee. In Newburgh, there were a couple of sites. One was far too small. The other one had relatively poor access when compared with this one. Again, we don't know whether either of those sites could actually be purchased or not. We have no evidence that they are actually for sale. So, you know, we think we've really sharpened our pencils on the alternatives analysis and the land needs analysis. And there's really no, in terms of the evidence in the record, there's really no debate about whether or not there's a need for light industrial land in the county. That's been pretty firmly demonstrated by both of the studies that are in the record. And then as for the alternative site analysis, as I just went over, we've cast an extremely wide net with the second round of analysis, and we believe that the substantial evidence in the record demonstrates that there are no available suitable sites with the right zoning that could serve this proposed use. And then, you know, as a practical matter, when you consider the appropriateness of converting this from very low density residential to light industrial, it might be helpful to actually look at the site. And I'm going to try and share my screen here. Let's see. One
And
moment.
Chair, I have a couple of questions on things that that Garrett raised. But if I'm happy to wait until the end of this segment. So.
Why don't you go ahead and ask your question, Commissioner?
Okay, I wasn't sure if it would be distracting for Garrett, from Mr. Stevenson. And so my first question for you, if you're available, I know that you're in the middle of showing this, but is in your view, is the ability to purchase the criteria for available? Because that's just not how I would interpret available. I would interpret available as you can use it either through a lease or a purchase access.
Well, I will answer that question in just a moment, Commissioner Kula, but first, can you guys see my screen and see the site here? Okay, great.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's why we cast a wide net. And so when you look, Commissioner Kula, at the sites that we analyzed, we basically assumed for purpose of the analysis that they were all available. I wanted to make the note that depending on, regardless of how you interpret the term available, we have no evidence one way or another whether they're available. We don't know that any of them are actually for sale. But again, for purposes of responding to the criteria, I think to your point, we wanted to take the most conservative approach to code compliance that we could. And so the reasons why we believe that these sites are not suitable and should be excluded as alternatives are entirely reasons of zoning, access, site size, things that are inherent to the site itself and not availability.
Okay, great. And then a follow-up, if I may, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you. You also noted the review criteria, which is that have you demonstrated the need for more light industrial land? And this isn't going to add to the stockpile of available light industrial land. Is that accurate?
Well, I don't think the purpose of adding light industrial is just to stockpile it, Commissioner Kula.
Right, but it won't be available then. Would that be accurate?
The criteria. So the criteria, this is a post-acknowledgement plan amendment, which means we're not in the grand comprehensive planning stage. And when you're doing comprehensive planning, you would look to establish a considerable stockpile of light industrial land in this context. Here, we have a specific site, and the post-acknowledgement plan amendments are specifically treated in the criteria as we are treating this one, and that's what the criteria require us to show. So I don't think that the criteria are intended for us to demonstrate that, hey, we're adding to your light industrial land by bringing in a bunch of vacant land. And I suspect you'll never get an application like that, simply because people who want to pay the money to bring these to the board are going to want to use the land. So no, we're not adding to the vacant industrial land base of the county, but we're also not taking away from it because we are not consuming one of those few open sites that are there. That's what the criteria require us to demonstrate, and that's what we've done. But your point is, I think, an intuitive one and well taken.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to hear you say that. That's all. Not the last part. The first part of explaining the difference between need and that's my last question for now.
Thank you. But to follow up on that, and that's a great question. To follow up on that, what this in effect does, and we just heard a presentation, as we've heard over the years from SETCOR, is the dearth of industrial lands in the county. And this would add, sort of by definition, it would add to the stock of industrial lands. And if Mr. Stewart did prevail and did do business there and decided he wanted to go live somewhere else, that would still be light industrial land. So it's banked. But anyway.
That's a very good point, Chair Starrett. Thank you. Yeah, so all of these post-acknowledgement plan amendments kind of go the same way, and throughout the state, in every jurisdiction, they really ask similar questions, although worded differently. And that's a general policy that we don't want to be necessarily adding a substantial amount of land to one category or another if there's already some available. Now, as an aside, I think that this county could stand to have a lot more vacant industrial land if it's only got 15 acres, but that's a separate question. So, to just, I guess, sum up what we've found in our analysis is we think we've met the criteria. We think that staff agrees with us on that. The record is extremely clear on the need for additional industrial land, and that need has become even more profound since the last analysis was done last year. And I think we've done, frankly, a yeoman's job of going back and looking at any potential available sites with the right zoning and the right operative characteristics. And you can kind of tell from this aerial photograph I have here what we're talking about. And I know Tom didn't mention it, but I understand the proposal would be to retain the existing structure. And my guess is that most of the equipment, if not all of it, would be parkable within the existing graveled area there. So what we're not talking about is a giant outdoor storage yard like a tractor dealership or something like that. It's going to be a very, very modest operation, and it necessarily so because the county requires fairly deep buffers along both 99W and then from the, I think it's mainly from 99W and then also from the north. And so when you actually net out the size of this parcel, it's not terribly large, and I don't think you're ever going to see a very, very, very intense light industrial use here. But there are certain aspects to it that make it very desirable. Obviously, you don't have folks living right up next to it. It's bordered from any residential development, any farmland by both a small road and the railroad tracks. And it's got fairly convenient access on a 99W. What makes this great, putting my development hat on, is we don't need to go to ODOT and ask for a new access on the 99W. You can use the rear side roads, and that will make ODOT very happy. So, when I listened to the hearing, and I apologize, I wasn't involved during the proceedings earlier, but when we listened to the hearing, it sounded like there were some concerns about what this could look like, concerns about this being kind of a threshold to Dundee. Are we going to make it look like, an outdoor equipment yard or what have you? And so I think that was a fair question. And so what I asked my client to do and what he agreed to do was put together a landscape buffering plan. And this is not necessarily just something that we're throwing out there. We've requested in both of our written materials to have this be a condition of approval, and I'll show you what it looks like right now. So the intent with this plan was to recognize, obviously, the existence of the existing building there because we do want to keep it. But what we've got is sort of a double walled approach to buffering here, where you've got a row of amur, which are the flame maples, coming from south to north. In front of that, arborvitae. We preserve the existing tree, and then we add some additional trees towards the northeast. So we think that, frankly, I think it's going to look as good and probably better than what you see now. There are additional buffer standards that we are also going to have to meet through site design review. So we think it's going to be about as attractive a project as anybody could put here under a light industrial zoning. So we offer that for your consideration, but I think that it just demonstrates that Tom's willing to go the extra mile to make sure that any concerns about the appearance as you're coming into Dundee are addressed. So with that, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about our transportation analysis. The original transportation analysis correctly determined that this is going to actually produce fewer average daily trips than if you put a house on it. And the reason for that is that a house typically generates, for as near as makes no difference, 10 average daily trips per day. And I think that the rate we have for this one is, under this zoning with this particular development, is 6 average daily trips per day. But the transportation planning rule requires us to look at any potential use of this site under the light industrial zoning. And that's what Mr. Clement was able to do. And he's actually available if you have any questions for him about this. but he looked at a reasonable worst case scenario, which is what if Tom sold this tomorrow and you had a completely different unanticipated use come in. So we look at what uses are allowed in that zone, what's the maximum development capacity of this, and then he compared that with the data available on the capacity of the surrounding transportation system. And what he found is that there will be no significant effect on the transportation system. He also found that the crash data for this area demonstrates that there are no substantial safety issues, and that even if there were, this wouldn't add to them. And as a follow-up question, I asked Chris, because I think one of the commissioners, it might have been you, Commissioner Bershauer, were concerned about what the proportion of heavy truck traffic in and out of there. And there's two answers to that. Under a reasonable worst case scenario, you can expect about 5% of those trips to be heavy trucks. That's just looking at the zoning and what could potentially go in that zoning. For us, you heard from Tom that he has actually a fairly limited number of vehicles that are going to be going in and out. They won't be going in and out every day, but I don't believe he has any semi-truck size vehicles. He's got one large dump truck, one small one trailer, and one equipment truck. So we just don't see this as being a generator of large truck traffic under any scenario. And part of it, frankly, has to do with just how small this site is once you net out the required buffering, making sure ODOT's happy, making sure the county site plan review criteria are met. You actually end up with a site that's mostly grass and trees with the existing building and a small parking area. So that's what we found there. There was a question that the city of Dundee brought up about annexation, and I went ahead and chased that down. This site is not adjacent to the city limits. It's not within the urban growth boundary, which means two things. Number one, the city would actually have to expand its urban growth boundary to bring it in. I believe Ken Friday testified on April 22nd that he believes that's highly likely to occur within the 20-year planning period, or at least within the foreseeable future. The second thing is that even if that UGB were surrounding the site, you'd have to have neighboring properties come in so that you can be contiguous in order to annex. So there's no reason to believe that we could annex this under any realistic scenario within the foreseeable future, and I would guess also within the planning period, which is typically 20 years. There was a question about septic. You have in your materials an email from Susan Richardson, who is a Yamhill County environmental health specialist, that basically said, look, this site is perfect for a holding tank, and as a practical matter, you're not going to have a large wastewater generation on the site anyway, because it's going to have, as I understand it, one bathroom for the employees that will use it, if at all, in the mornings and evenings. So there were no concerns from the county. It seems that it's entirely feasible to safely handle any waste issues on the site. That's in the record too. The last thing I wanted to mention before opening myself up for any more questions you may have is, in getting back to the alternative site analysis, one thing I think it's important for the board to consider is where the market area is here. And I think it's at some level we all want to reduce traffic in the jurisdictions where we live, and all of the alternative sites that we looked at are south and west of Dundee, but for the most part, just because of the Portland metro area's economy, for the most part, Tom's projects are all closer to the Tri-County Portland metro area. And if you take a look at this map, you'll see the last, I don't know, 20 or so, or maybe slightly less projects and where those are located. And to us, when we're looking at alternative sites, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense from a traffic standpoint to locate this further south and east in the county, which would extend the length of the trips that his equipment would have to take, increase the number of trips in the county generally, and make his business a little more difficult simply because he's spending an extra 30 minutes potentially trying to get to and from the sites. So this is not exactly a scientific way of dealing with this question, but it's the best we could do in short order. But I think it's a relatively accurate portrayal of the fact that I think it's both in our interest and the county's interest to have this use located towards the northeast corner of the county, and that happens to be where this site is. So with that, I'm sure there's something, commissioners, that I have left out, and I apologize for that in advance. So I will leave myself open for questions. But before I do, I just want to convey my thanks to the board for allowing us to have this time to go back and sharpen our pencils. I think we've done about as good a job as anybody could do within that time. We were very, very lucky to have Johnson Economics and Mr. Clemo available to produce these materials for us, which was certainly something I was concerned about when I looked at the timeline. But we think we have, with the help of this board, a much better application. We think we've definitely met the criteria. We've got a lot of substantial evidence showing that. And we don't have any countervailing evidence in the record either. So with that, I'll conclude and leave myself open for questions. And also, if you have questions of Mr. Danachich, Mr. Clemo, or Mr. Buckley from Johnson, they're on the line too.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevenson. Commissioners, questions?
Chair, I just have one observation, if I may.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. I must say that this last slide, I really, it's not part of the review criteria, but it suggests that he would be better suited for having this storage facility in the Portland metro area, the urban area. And I just want to note that that's what this shows me, even though this is a review criteria that are specific to light industrial. So, but that's it. That's just the observation.
Well, if you don't mind me responding, Commissioner Kula, I don't know if I'd agree with that, for the simple reason I think that the county wants to have this business in the county. This is money that's going to a county resident and a county business owner. And I think if you look at any businesses that are located in Newburgh and Dundee that serve a regional reach, I mean, you can see projects in Newburgh, 2 of them, projects in Wilsonville, Canby. It's just the nature of this business that you're going to be going all over. And if I might add a personal anecdote, I had my driveway paved by a company in Oregon City, which is actually a much larger haul to my house than from Dundee to Tualatin. So I think I would push back respectfully on that point.
Thank you. Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. And Garrett, I would just want to say for the record that we love our small businesses and we want to keep them here. So I respectfully disagree with Commissioner Kula. So forgive me if these sound like trivial questions, because I'm not quite sure if I or, but it appears that the main driveway, if you could go back to your slide where it shows the site.
Certainly, Commissioner. Give me one moment.
So
Do I have the right slide here?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
So that is Edwards Road, is that correct? That sort of parallels the railroad?
So I apologize. I've seen a number of different names for this road on a number of different maps, and I think it's to go back and look. I actually have it in my letter.
I think that was.
I don't know the name of it offhand. I know that Google
Ben's
Earth
Road.
tells me one thing, and then everything else tells me another.
Mr.
I know-
Stewart, did you have to, is weighing in. Go ahead, Mr. Stewart.
I believe it was Old Ben's Road.
Yeah, Beans or Bines, I think was the name of it.
I thought it was Benz, like Mercedes Benz, but a different spelling. Benz, B-E-I-N-Z, B-E-N-Z. B-E-I-N-Z, I think.
Okay.
That was the old cutoff to make that right, because it was a sharp turn before, back in the day.
So on page 32 of the most recent packet, it says, so maybe I'm just, I don't know. Anyway, irrelevant really to my question, but so that is the main entrance and exit for the business, correct?
Yeah, you're coming in and out.
Yes, yeah, that's the sole. I understand that to be the sole entrance and exit.
Okay, so that's, I think it's Fox Farm Road right there. So there's an additional street buffer before you get to 99. And then this kind of, well,
That
it's-
Fox
yeah,
Farm Road's across the way of 99. That is Old Dayton Road right there. That's coming across the tracks. Then when you get across 99, I believe it's Fox Farm.
okay. So the property that is just under that, we can see a piece of it. There's more buildings there. Do they have a direct driveway onto 99? It appears so.
Yeah, they have two accesses. They have the access that's down on 99 and Ben's Road. And that's a tow truck company.
Okay, so there's no expectation that there would be any sharing of that entrance directly onto 99.
Nope. It's just too sharp of a turn. And then if you could see on the very corner where it says Google Earth down in the front, in the middle of that, there's a main pipe that runs natural gas, and there's a water fire hydrant for the highway and stuff. And that's sitting directly in the middle of that. So that's totally blocked off from the state when they did the road years ago, I guess. When they stopped the road, closed it. That was all stopped then.
Okay. This might be totally irrelevant, but is there a concern about signage, or do you have a plan to have signage at some point on this business?
I'm not really, there was signs there, but I'm not worried about signage. People that know me, my trucks are lettered enough, so people that know me and my advertising, asphalt, people, there'll be no, advertising if I can get it, if the commission in town lets me, so be it. I'd love it, but I'm not too more worried about that as much as what I got to do here now to please everybody and to make everything happen, where my office is a mile from my house.
And Commissioner Bershauer, one thing to consider, and I'm sure you know it, but I'll just point it out, is that before we are approved to do anything here, we have to go through a site design review. And so if there is signage that needs to go in, it's going to be subject to that review. But in my discussions with Tom, we did not have any plans for, large, big signs saying Oregon Paving Company or anything like that. I think the idea, and as you can see from the landscape plan, I don't know how feasible those signs would be anyway. I think the idea is to keep the appearance as garden-like as we can as it abuts 99W, so that we can use the site that's already got the structure and the paved area.
Okay, that's helpful. And then my next question, well, final question, might be for Ken Friday, but how often do we include landscaping requirements as part of this process? Is that a pretty typical thing? Because it will incur Mr. Stewart, more cost essentially in this process.
Yes, we do landscaping as a fairly typical thing in a site design, especially when it's along the state highway.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question. Oh, let me just jump in here real quick. Mr. Stewart, maybe you can answer this in terms of impact to an adjacent building or a neighboring property. What's been the narrative so far?
Such as, I don't understand, ma'am.
Oh, sorry. So basically, and maybe this is a question for Mr. Stevenson in terms of the impact to an adjacent property and how this.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't mind, Chair Starrett, I'll take a shot at that. I'm unaware of any opposition from the neighbors about this one. There might have been some concerns raised regarding traffic, but again, when you look at the traffic pattern, you're not going to have any of these vehicles going, I guess, south. If you look at, and I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but they're going to come out of here, go north on Beans Road, and then take a left onto the highway. So you're just not going to have these vehicles adjacent to anybody else's property. There's already light industrial activity going on to the south. There's train tracks, so trains, I assume, are going by periodically. I don't want to speak for the entire record because I wasn't involved during the Planning Commission or board hearings originally. But when I look at laying out the site as it relates to surrounding development, I think that the neighbors are not going to see a substantial change there. And most importantly, they're just not going to see any of these vehicles on the sections of roads that directly abut their properties.
I think my question more specifically is, we have a towing company there, excuse me, adjacent, and I'm just wondering about the impact in terms of vehicles being parked there, or how that impacts that particular concern.
Well, all the vehicles were going to be parked, if you can sort of put your north arrow here, all the vehicles when they're parked are going to have to be parked north of this fence. They're not going to be in the way of the towing company when it goes out. And at any rate, the
There's a
towing
wall
company,
there.
yeah, and so, but at any rate, the towing company has their own separate access onto 99W. So I can't imagine a scenario where having this office and the few vehicles that we keep there would interrupt the activities of the towing company.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Stevenson, excuse me, did you have anything else to add?
No, Chair Starr, but I think Commissioner Kula has a question.
Oh, sorry about that.
I didn't want to interrupt
Commissioner.
that exchange.
Go ahead.
I'm good at getting my words in. So I just wanted to check in. I don't have I'm trying to pull the packet up from the original one. The overlay for a future bypass interchange, how does that, I don't know if I ever saw the overlay on one of the maps, but it was too. How does that impact this property? Maybe that's a question.
If you don't mind, Commissioner, I'd like to pitch that one to Ken Friday or Stephanie Armstrong, because I don't have that data.
Okay. Mr. Friday?
And I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Cool. You want to re-ask it?
Absolutely. Director Friday, how does the overlay for the Newburgh-Dundee bypass interchange, East Dundee bypass interchange overlay with this?
Yeah, whenever we have a project like this, we always send a notice to the state. It is within the overlay area. So we'll also be doing that with the site design review, is sending the notice to the state. I've actually had some conversations with ODOT, I think it's been 2 months ago, and they're even thinking about not doing this interchange here. They might actually move it to a different location that they think might actually work out better. But at this point, yeah, we do coordinate with ODOT on any sort of application of this sort.
Thank you. Commissioner
Okay,
Cool?
thank you. Yeah, I think my question for Director Friday was really, does the overlay actually impinge on this site? And I realized, the East Dundee interchange, it's a horrendously costly enterprise. So I appreciate the city of Dundee and its residents considering some. But will it actually affect this property?
Yeah, you know what? I would have to go back and look at the plans. I think it would be on the edge. Excuse me, from what I recall, but I'd have to double check that.
Okay, that's what I recall too. So thank you.
And if you'll indulge me, Commissioner Kula, with my observation here, because I've dealt with a lot of industrial sites that are subject to road improvement projects and condemnation. This is really the perfect use for this, because we're reusing an existing building and existing parking area. We're not building new buildings here. And so I think what would happen here is, if you saw a very, very heavy redevelopment of the site with an expensive building type or so forth, it would make more difficult the interchange when it came to pass. And so it's very, very difficult when you operate an industrial business to have these sort of black clouds over your property. But in this case, the risks, I think, to everybody involved are pretty low, because we're just simply trying to reuse the site generally as is, with some additional landscaping.
Thank you.
And if I might add, Commissioner, In looking at the overlay map, the property is outside of the planned bypass.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for that question. Mr. Stevenson, was there someone next? Did you want?
Chair Starrett, that's entirely at the board's discretion. We've got all the experts on the line, so if you guys have any questions and want somebody smarter than me, please do ask.
Okay, we have Dan Danachich, and we also have Chris Clemo, Brendan Buckley. Is there anyone who is part of the applicant's case who wanted to make testimony or add something to the discussion? Or perhaps commissioners had specific questions that these participants could address? So I'll leave that up to whoever.
Is Mr. Stevenson, is there any way you can, I'm stuck on a screen with just showing all the stuff. I don't see nobody other than whoever's speaking at the time. I don't know if my screen's acting up or what. Like, I only see one person when it pops up at a time. Before I seen everybody on the board.
Can we end screen sharing?
Right here.
Oh,
Yeah, there we go.
yeah,
There you go.
certainly. Let me.
Commissioner Kula.
Here, to your question, I feel comfortable and I feel like I comprehend the expert testimony in the record without additional explanation. But it's very helpful having Stevenson and the owner, Stuart.
Thank you. So if there's no one who feels they need to add anything to the discussion, we can go ahead and move on. And if there are no additional questions from the board, thank you. We'll go ahead and we'll move on to the appellant's case. Do we have any opposition?
Testimony in support of the application, Madam Chair, if it would come first. You would
Okay.
call for testimony in support of the application.
Okay, my understanding. Is there anybody else who would like to make testimony in addition to what we've heard? Mr. Stewart, go ahead.
No, thank you. No, I was just figuring out this thing. I never done this before.
That's
So
okay. Join the
it just
club.
turned on. Oh yeah, hey.
We're figuring it all out as we go, but we
Well, it sure beats paving the parking lot I'm supposed to be doing right now. I like it sitting in my vehicle in the air conditioned under the tree. It's more than happy. Take your
a little
time.
warm out there. A little warm out there.
A little
Is there
bit.
any, thank you, any other additional testimony in support of the application that would like to weigh in at this point?
Me?
Nope, I'm asking for, I mean, unless you have anything else you want to add, I'm asking if there's anybody else who wants to speak in support of your application. And if there isn't anybody who specifically wants to speak in support of the application, we can go ahead and see if there is anyone who would like to speak in opposition or who is part of the appellant's case. Is there anyone joining us who wants to speak in opposition to this application? And I don't know if we have anybody. I don't see anybody who's on the screen at this time. We'll give it one more second just to make sure. All right, I don't see anybody who wants to speak in opposition to the application. So I'm going to ask for public agency reports. Stephanie Armstrong, that's you.
Yeah, there were no additional public agency comments.
Okay. Well, we don't need rebuttal from the applicant because we didn't have anybody speaking in opposition to the application. So do we need to talk about keeping the record open, or are we going to go ahead and just move on to staff recommendation? Mr. Friday?
Chair Starrett, I think that's a question for me. We would waive any final written argument. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so staff recommendation.
Staff believes the applicant has satisfied the zone change criteria and shown that the property is not well suited for rural residential use. There's a need for additional LI zone property, and the application demonstrates there is a lack of available lands within the county. Staff recommends approval of the request based upon the findings for approval in the staff report and the additional evidence provided by the applicant with the following two conditions. Condition number 1, an application for site design review shall be submitted by the applicant and approved by the county prior to any new development or change in use of any existing structures. For any similar use listed in the Yamhill County zoning ordinance, section 702.02, applicant shall demonstrate in the site design review how the proposed use is consistent with goal 14. Condition number 2, the applicant shall install landscaping consistent with section 1010 of the Yamhill County zoning ordinance and the proposed landscaping plan submitted June 16th, 2021. Said landscaping shall be installed prior to operation of the business, or a surety bond shall be posted by the applicant and approved by the director.
Thank you. I have a question about that. If the business is operational, how does that impact continuation of the business pending landscaping? Or does that bond address that? That would be for Stephanie.
So yeah, the business, the landscaping is supposed to be installed prior to the business operating from the property. If there were, any building permits that were required, they could do that work with the surety bond in place, saying that we're going to make those updates and improvements to this building, but we won't operate until we have installed the landscaping.
Okay, great. Mr. Stewart, yes.
I have, I do a lot of paving for a lot of nurseries, big nurseries around. I already have 90% of those trees ready to be put right in the ground as of this weekend, because Friday and Saturday I was supposed to be paving, but it's going to be way too hot for my guys. So if I get approval today, and I will be more than happy to do any of that stuff starting today, tomorrow.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Stewart, and thank you, Stephanie. So we'll go ahead and close the hearing and begin deliberations. Commissioners, thoughts? Commissioner Kula.
Gotta find my mute button. I just want to thank Tom Stewart for bringing this back to us. In the original hearing, I asked for more information for a greater analysis because I was concerned that we really hadn't looked everywhere. And I'm really glad that you did a much more extensive analysis. I'm sorry that it clearly has taken a lot more cost to do that. But I feel a lot more comfortable approving this land use decision with the more information that you've provided. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I would echo that. My concerns, I obviously they were addressed in the additional information, Mr. Stevenson. My concerns about water and my concerns about my concern really basically has to do with impact to an existing business, the tow truck company, and that's been something that I've had concerns about. I feel that a lot of those questions, while not completely put to bed, I think a lot of the concerns have been answered for me, and I appreciate the comprehensive additional information because it really did put a fine point on the specifics of this. So thank you for that. Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. I want to echo Commissioner Kula's thoughts about Mr. Stewart. I think it shows his commitment to not only our county, but to his business to be able to, or to take the time to invest this amount of work into making this happen. As Commissioner Stewart stated, most of my concerns, if not all, were addressed, from traffic to the water usage, water issues. The UGB issue was on my list initially, so I'm glad that that was clarified. And just clarification on the in and out, the driveway, and how that would impact 99W. I also think that it's incredibly generous and wonderful that Mr. Stewart is so willing to work with us and landscape the property. As you know, it's quite a beautiful area around there. Across the street is some wineries and some very beautiful pieces of property. So I appreciate that he's willing to do that. And I am inclined to approve the application.
Commissioner, would you like to make a motion?
I can, but I have to pull it up. Hang on just a second.
I was glad because I didn't have it on my screen either. So it's PAZ something.
I have it if nobody else does. I've got it in front of me. Do you want me to do you have it, Commissioner Bershauer?
I don't.
I have it. Okay. All righty. Well, then I'll go ahead and make a motion, and that would be to approve in consideration of docket PAZ-01-21, approve the comprehensive plan amendment from VLDR to industrial and a zone change from VLDR 2.5, very low density, to light industrial. And that is the motion. If there is no further discussion, Commissioner Kula.
Well, I knew that Councilor Sadler was going to have something, so I wanted to make sure he was in line.
With the conditions that were read by Stephanie Armstrong.
Okay, with those conditions as were stated. So if there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you all for your hard work, for our planning department, for Mr. Sadlow, and everybody who spoke in favor of the application, and Mr. Stewart, and everybody. Oh, and Mr. Huffer.
I just noticed that Mr. Stewart is as an attendee, has raised his hand to make a comment if it's up to the chair.
Yes, I don't see Mr. Stewart on here anymore. So thank you for that. I don't see him anywhere. So Mr. Stewart, wherever you are, just.
We'll have Kerry promote, and he'll join us shortly.
Oh, there he is. Can't hear you.
Oh,
Assumed he wants to thank you.
Can't hear you.
I got it. There you go. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I will make it better. I wouldn't put my name and my butt out in the main road and make a mess where people would be assaulted or looking at something. I appreciate this.
Mr. Stewart, can I ask where you're from?
I'm originally from Boston. I moved out here back in '92.
I just had this, I recognized a familiar accent. I'm from Brooklyn. I went to Boston. I went to school in Boston, and I heard you talking, and it was, wow, I haven't heard that in a long time. It really is.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it. A couple of my kids was born here, and they talk just like me, because when you teach your kids how to talk, and they know how to park the car down at Harvard Yard.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
3 weeks, July 15th for adoption of the written decision and findings.
Okay, is that
That's okay with you?
acceptable? Yes.
I don't
All right.
know if if Daniel and the other gentleman's on anymore, Mr. Armstrong. I don't know if I got bounced out when I raised my hand. That's why I was trying to say that I got bounced out, but it went back on. And then if we have any questions or whatever we need to do, we'll be more than happy to do anything.
Okay.
I will be communicating with Mr. Stevenson about the findings.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. We'll go ahead and close the hearing. And so if there is nothing else, I know we addressed some announcements at the beginning of the meeting, and I don't know that we could top that, Commissioner Kula, as far as announcements go. So I just don't have anything that even comes close. Does anybody else have any announcements that they'd like to make?
Well, I was hoping we were going to hear from you, Chair Starrett.
Well, I threw in my YCAP Providence. That's all I got.
That's pretty good. I do want to make sure that people remember how hot it's going to be and stay safe.
Yes, and don't forget, we have people out there and elderly people that might need to be checked on. And if you've got a neighbor you haven't seen in a while, knock on the door. And also remember, please, if you've got animals that are outside, make sure they've got cover and water. And everybody just stay nice and cool and be very cognizant of the fire danger. So thank you to Carrie and Carolina